Om Karmanyavadikaraste Ma Phaleshu Kadachana Ma Karma Phal Hetu Ma Te Sangostava Karmani. You have the right to perform action. You have no hold on the results of your actions. May you not seek the rewards of your actions, and may you never engage in wrong action. Dear fellow devotees, Swami asked me to give a talk on philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi as he is out of town. And let me say at the very outset, I'm not expert on Gandhian philosophy. I, in fact, even don't come very close to it. But most of the Indians are familiar with Mahatma Gandhi, and most of the Americans, I'm sure they've heard the name. Most of you are familiar that he was a different kind of a warrior who brought freedom to India, freedom to other masses, the low caste, the Harijans, the scheduled caste, freedom from the higher caste. So he was a fighter, and he brought freedom without any violence, without any, the way we understand war, without fighting a bullet, without fighting any guns. Every country has a hero, like we have George Washington. Every country has a hero who has brought freedom to the country. But Gandhi was, of course, a different kind of a hero. He did bring freedom, but through different kind of a war. He named that war Satyagraha, and we will talk about that. But other thing I do want to bring up is that it was a week ago, on 30th of January, that was 50th anniversary of Gandhi's assassination. It has been 50 years, 30th of January 1948, that he was assassinated. It's very strange, but in many ways, we all know what happens to a lot of people, a lot of men of God. He was like Christ. Christ taught peace, taught non-violence. But look what happened to him. In the same way, Mahatma Gandhi taught peace, taught non-violence. Every day, every breath that he took was of peace and love. But he was shot to death by an assassin. But even in death, he had peace. He had no anger in his eyes. He had no hatred. And when bullets went through his chest, he fell down. The only words that came out of his mouth were, only words that came out of his lips were, "Hey Ram, oh God." And on his deathbed, he told the authorities not to hang the assassin, but to forgive him. So even in his death, he loved the person who killed him. That's the extreme form of non-violence that Mahatma Gandhi preached. Now, Mahatma was, of course, not his name. Mahatma means great soul. Gandhi was his family name, and everybody in India either called him Mahatma or called him Bapu. Bapu means father. And that's why he was called father of the nation. When Jawaharlal Nehru gave speech announcing death of Mahatma Gandhi, the first word that came out of his mouth were, "Bapu is no more. Our father has died." Just a brief summary of his life, and then we'll go on to philosophy and how he developed it. Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869 at Porbandar, which is a state in Gujarat. Mohandas was his name. His father's name was Karamchand, so he was named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, or M.K. Gandhi. His father was a prime minister in that state, He was very strict, very authoritarian, but very loyal to his state. So much so that when he died, family had no money left over from his estate. They were left poor. That Mahatma Gandhi's older brother had to struggle hard to get money to raise the rest of the family. Mahatma Gandhi's mother's name was Putli Bai. She was a very pious and religious lady. She believed in fasting, and every year during the rainy season, she used to fast. And the purpose was she will not eat food unless she has seen sun. And as most of the people who are from India know that in monsoon you hardly see sun. And if you do, it comes out, and by the time you go out to see it, somebody tells you the sun is out, you go to the house to see it, the clouds have again covered it. And that kind of a hide and seek with sun would go on for hours and sometimes even days. But that never perturbed that lady. She will go out, sun is not there, she will tell her children, it's okay, I will go back to my work. Same thing happens in the afternoon, same thing happens in the evening, and she could go without food for many days and not be upset, not lie on bed and say, I can't live, I don't have my food. She would carry on her religious duties, her duties of the household. Mohandas had two older brothers and one older sister. He was the youngest. He was married at the age of 13, which was fairly common at that time in India. And Gandhi, in his book, wrote that he regretted that, but he had no control. And the rest of his life, he's preached to all young men never to get married at a younger age. At age of 18, he went to England to study law. He studied at University of London. He was there for about 4 years. There he got involved with many organizations, including vegetarianism, health, and other things. But before he went to England, his mother would not allow him to go to England because she was afraid that he may start eating meat and start drinking alcohol and get into bad habit. So he had to make 3 promises to his mother that he will not touch meat, he will not drink alcohol, and he would look at every other woman as his sister or mother. And while in England, many opportunities came where he was ready to break those vows, but face of his mother came in front of him. And he said later on that saved him from falling into hell. After finishing his law, he came back to India. He tried to practice law in Bombay, but he was a big failure. He could not stand up in front of judge and say even a single word. He would know the whole case, he knew what to do, but as soon as his client was called, he would stand up and start trembling and no word will come out of his mouth. So he would return the money to his client and ask one of his friends to take the case and leave the court. So he was getting very much embarrassed. And his brother was getting very upset with him because he had spent a lot of money on his education in England, and here he comes back to Bombay and hasn't been able to earn any money by hasn't even succeeded in winning single case. Around that time, he got an offer from South Africa. One of the Indians, a businessman in South Africa, needed legal advice, in fact, a legal expert, and he promised to pay for his fare and a lot of money if he would go over there and resolve his matters. And there he goes, and his whole life starts to change over there. And that's where he developed his Satyagraha, or the name that he coined, Satyagraha. And what I want to do is, I first want to kind of give you some description of what is Satyagraha, and then go back to his life history to see how did he develop it. Because many people have written that Mahatma Gandhi was a simple man when he was born. He was like most of us, afraid of a lot of things, But how did he grow up to be a Mahatma? That the whole country, not in the whole country, the whole world respected him. So where did the transformation come? And I will try to kind of point out few things in his life that how did that transformation happen. Even that epic movie of Attenborough, he also asked the same question, that a young boy who is shy, who cannot talk to his friends, who is afraid of dark, who is afraid of snakes, who is afraid of everything, how did he change so much to challenge the whole world, to challenge the British Empire, stand in front of King of England and say to him point blank, you leave India? How can he do that? He developed that strength through practice of satyagraha. So let's understand that. Many people have translated satyagraha as civil disobedience, and many of you are familiar with that word because civil obedience was, to some extent, used in this country by Martin Luther King Jr. to attain equal rights for African Americans under the law. That may be a close description, but many people have also called satyagraha as a way to achieve some political action or social change in society or independence like Mahatma Gandhi did for India. So it has been used very loosely, and many times Mahatma Gandhi himself used this word loosely because he was on one side using it for freedom of India, on the other side he was using it for the freedom of untouchables, the low-caste Indians from the high-caste Indians. So he was using it in many different ways. But actually what he meant was something different. He meant satyagraha is a approach to conflict and resolve it non-violently or peacefully at many levels of human interaction. That level can be at family, in your community, in your office, or in a country, or at international level. So you can use that at any level, but basic philosophy remains the same. Gandhi had a distinct and precise force in his mind when he coined this term satyagraha. He was talking of a spiritual force, a potent and viable source of energy which is available to all individuals, though few are aware of it. Satyagraha is a Sanskrit word, and as you know, most of Sanskrit words are a combination of two words. It's satya and agraha. Satya means truth, which is the same thing for love. Love and truth are synonymous. Agraha means firmness, to stay firm, to hold on to. So satyagraha literally means holding on to truth, or to stay firm in truth. But Gandhi further explained it that the force which is born of truth is love and non-violence. Agraha is the one which provides the energy, the force for truth. As I said, love and non-violence are synonymous, but at the same time, truth and love are also synonymous. So all these three things become the one thing. Love, truth, and non-violence are basically the same thing. And the idea is to live in truth, understand truth, and hold on to truth. Gandhi also said that if we have our goal right, we must use proper means to achieve that goal. And to achieve satya, you have to use non-violence. The goal has to be pure. If your goal is not pure, then you may not reach the right goal. You may reach a goal, but that's not the goal that you're looking for. Even Martin Luther King said in one of his speeches, one day we must come to see that peace is not merely a goal, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. So the ends, the goal, and the means that we use, they all should be pure. Only then we can reach a pure goal. Also, satya or truth literally means that which is, that what it is, the way it is, and that which never changes but holds true under all circumstances and at all times. So anything that doesn't change and holds true at all times is God. So that's why we say God is truth, or truth is God. Gandhi further cautioned, when we simplify our life to that extent that we are looking for truth, we are looking for God, and everybody believes he or she is speaking the truth and is close to God, he cautioned there. He said, God alone knows absolute truth. We, on the other hand, can pursue a relative truth. But if our search for truth is pure and devoid of self-interest, we will not come to any harm. He further elaborated, what may appear as truth to one person will often appear as untruth to another person. This should not worry the seeker of truth. When there is honest effort, it will be realized that what appears to be different truths are in fact countless and apparently different leaves of the same tree. Truth is the right designation of God. Hence, there is nothing wrong in every man following truth according to his own lights. Indeed, it is his duty to do so. Then if there are mistakes on the part of a person seeking truth, it will be automatically set right. For the quest of truth requires tapas. Tapas means self-sacrifice or self-suffering, sometimes even unto death. There can be no place in it for self-interest. In such selfless search for truth, nobody can lose his bearings for long. So Gandhi was emphasizing, when you're talking about truth, you're also talking about kind of selfless service. That truth alone is not enough. It has to be free of self-interest. Because Gandhi knew human nature and felt that truth could become unethical. It is because we have at this moment everybody claiming the right of conscience without going through any discipline whatsoever. What makes the secret of pure truth unethical is self-interest. And Gandhi's antidote to untruth was systematic reduction of self-centeredness, which is spelled out in a single tenet, reduce yourself to zero. And there is an interesting story here which I want to share with you. As some of you know, that Gandhi was often asked very funny questions, sometimes challenging questions by different reporters. And one day one reporter asked him, Gandhi, don't you have any goal in life? It's a very challenging question. And Gandhi said, yes, I do. My goal is to reduce myself to zero. Now, those who come to Vedanta regularly probably wouldn't understand the meaning of it. Reducing yourself to zero means to reduce your ego to zero, so that you do not have much ego, and ego is the one which is responsible for most of our conflicts in daily life. So he was talking about reducing his ego to zero. He did not want to derive any personal benefit, any material benefit from any situation that he ever got involved in. He was always working for other people, and that's what he meant by reducing yourself to zero. And that's the discipline we all need if we are going to follow truth. If we want to seek truth, we have to develop a system of self-sacrifice, controlling our ego. Otherwise, what happens when ego is involved with search for truth, then that leads to self-righteousness, arrogance, and tyranny. And I think we all know a lot of examples of this in our daily life and in the countries all over the world. Now, Gandhi did attach ahimsa to his satyagraha. And he further elaborated ahimsa, and he was the master of this ahimsa, which we all understand as non-violence. Gandhi said, ahimsa is the noblest expression of truth, or properly speaking, way to truth. Ahimsa and truth are so intertwined that it is practically impossible to distinguish and separate them. They are like the two sides of a coin, or rather a smooth, unstamped metallic disc. Who can say which is the obverse and which is the reverse? Nevertheless, ahimsa is the means, truth is the end, which is the same thing as Martin Luther King said, that one day we must come to see that peace is not merely a goal, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. Now, ahimsa is usually translated as non-violence. Most of us use that word, non-violence. That's the way it is understood in the Western world. And Gandhi, whenever he used a word, he searched it thoroughly to the nth degree. He was a researcher, and everything that he said, he had worked it on himself in his own life and worked it for years. He meditated on it, he contemplated on it until he understood the full meaning of it. Ahimsa is usually translated as non-violence, but as is apparent from what I've said before, it goes much beyond that, because non-violence often means a kind of has a negative connotation. When we say non-violence, we say don't hurt this, don't kill this person, don't steal. It says when you have don't do this or don't do that, that's a negative connotation. So when we talk about non-violence, it kind of becomes a negative connotation. And also a kind of passive force, that it's not something you're doing it to achieve something, to uplift yourself. You're not doing it because you're asked not to do. Whereas Gandhi wanted it as a positive force, a dynamic force. He said that ahimsa is more like a dynamic state of mind which releases spiritual energy. How does it release spiritual energy? Gandhi said that strength does not come from physical capacity, not just from brutal force. The example he gave, that look at the British Empire, they had all the strength in the world. They controlled more than half of the world. But he alone, as a single person who was almost 5 feet tall, less than 90 pounds in weight, was able to bring it down. How? Because of his indomitable will. He had a very strong will. So ahimsa, when it releases spiritual energy, it strengthens your will. And when you have strong will, nothing can stand in front of you. A single person with a strong will can bring down any enormous force. This spiritual force, this ahimsa, is always lying latent in the depths of our consciousness. But with practice, we can always cultivate it and learn how to practice ahimsa in our life. Let me give you here another example of Gandhi's ahimsa. Through ahimsa, through love, his whole body, his whole actions, his thinking, everything was pure love. And that's what he transmitted to everybody. Anybody who came in contact with him was immediately transformed. Not only humans, even animals. He was living at an ashram. He used to raise his own goats. People basically did everything to remain self-sufficient. And every evening after dinner, he used to go for a long walk. And even at the age of 70, 80, he used to walk faster than any person on this earth. Everybody used to stay behind him. And after that walk, he would come back, sit under a tree, and he would give a brief lecture, sometime on Bhagavad Gita or something about ahimsa or truth or whatever was the subject. One day he was giving a talk, and Suddenly, there was a noise in the crowd because a cobra snake was coming towards the stage. And as you know, cobra is the poisonous snake, and its bite can result in immediate death. So everybody was afraid, and everybody was moving out of the way from the snake. And as it was going toward the stage, Gandhi saw it, and people are trying to tell him to move away, but he told them to be quiet and sit down. And Gandhi stayed motionless. His eyes were closed, he was meditating. Snake came, got into his lap, and moved away. Now, I'm not trying to say here, which most of you may have understood, that he controlled snake's actions, that snake did not bite him. That may be so. Some people will think it that way. What I understood from this was that he had no fear at all in himself. Most of us will be afraid and want to run away. Remember I said as a child he was afraid of everything. He was afraid of darkness. He was afraid of snakes. And here he sat there motionless, looked at the snake, and did not move a single muscle. So he had controlled fear in himself. And he, through control of fear, he had no hatred, and he had love for everything. He saw life in everything, same life in everybody as was in himself. So that's the utter example of ahimsa, or love, that Gandhi portrayed to everybody. Obviously, Gandhi practiced ahimsa in all aspects of his life, and it was a law to him. And this also means that if we want to understand ahimsa, we have to practice it. Just reading about it is not good enough. We may understand the words, we may understand the translation of ahimsa, but that doesn't mean that we have really understood it. To understand means to put it in your life's perspective. Gandhi often said that if you want to practice ahimsa, you have to be vigilant over all your actions, over your whole life, because it includes words, thoughts, as well as actions. And he further added that not to hurt any living thing is no doubt a part of ahimsa. That's the way we understand. But it is its least expression. The principle of ahimsa is hurt by every evil thought, by undue haste, by lying, by hatred, or by wishing ill to anybody. It is also violated by our holding on to what the world needs. If we have something and we are holding on to it, we are holding it where everybody else around us needs that thing and they're starving, then that's also ahimsa. And think of all those big leaders, dictators around the world who keep holding on to things while their own countrymen are starving. They are doing ahimsa against their own countrymen. They need to learn ahimsa to feed their own countrymen, but they are not doing that. One more common misconception about ahimsa, at least I grew up understanding it that way, and I'm sure a lot of other people from India and the world would think it that way, that ahimsa is meekness. It's not only meekness, it's also weakness. It's in fact the total opposite of that. You cannot practice ahimsa unless you're very strong in your heart, like Gandhi had showed. That to stand in front of somebody who wants to shoot you and you have no fear in your heart cannot be easy. And Gandhi often gave an example of turn your other cheek if somebody slaps you. That's not weakness. Gandhi said that he had thoroughly researched that, what Christ said, that when you offer your second cheek to the person, you're not looking for punishment. You're in fact trying to make the other person understand that the action that you're doing, that the violence that you're committing is nonsense, is useless. And I want you to understand that it's a folly on your part, because we are both same people. We are all men of God. your action of violence against me is an action of violence against yourself. So he said if they don't understand the second time, third time, fourth time, 20th time, he would still practice 21st time. And he showed that in South Africa, that many times he was walking on a footpath, and at that time, Indians were not allowed to walk on public footpaths. He would go and was often beaten, until those same people realized that it is as much his right to walk on the footpath as anybody else. And he was never afraid. He will always walk up to the person and say, you and I are the same. We have different color of skin, but what other difference do we have? And he did win at the end. So that brings us to the purpose of Satyagraha. The whole idea of Satyagraha is to make a change in the other person. The person who is trying to be violent towards you, you bring on a change in his heart. You change his heart. You make him understand love, so that love is transferred between two of you. In fact, when you are practicing ahimsa, you are treating your opponent with love and dignity at all the time. And all the years that he was in South Africa or in India, he never treated his opponents with indignity. He never used a harsh word against anybody. He always treated them with friendship. He offered them help. Even though he was being beaten, he was saying, make sure you don't get hurt. That is a form of ahimsa. So Gandhi said at the end, when he was describing this thing, that when you combine satya and ahimsa, truth and non-violence, you have developed an invincible force in you which nobody can beat. And he proved that with his own life. Now I want to go back and take a few incidents from his life and see how these things developed. A lot of people have come to believe that Gandhi was a mediocre person when he was a child. And I think they have got that from his book, My Experiments with Truth, his autobiography, which he wrote in 1928 and never finished after that. When he was writing that book, whatever page he wrote, he used to write in spurts. Someday he would write 3-4 pages, and then a week later another 3-4 pages, and a month later something more. But he never went back to correct or check what he wrote before. Most of us, we forget. We go back and check the reference to see what did I write so that I can give accurate information. He never went back to check what he wrote 2 years or 3 years ago. He said, whatever I wrote was absolute truth. What I'm writing today is absolute truth, and no truths can be different. So he never went back to check that. But he did write in his book, the first chapter, that I was a mediocre boy because I could not learn multiplications during first grade. And those who are from India probably know, in first grade, I learned not only multiplication 2, 3, and 4, but 1 1/2 times 2, 1 1/4 times 2, going up to 10. They're not easy to understand. But that doesn't mean he was not intelligent. Gandhi wrote that because he was a very humble person. Most of the people, when they write their autobiographies, they're highlighting their achievements. They glorify their achievements. Read anybody's autobiography. It is a self-glorification, at the least. Whereas Gandhi, when he wrote his autobiography, he was writing how he was and how things were developing in him, how he changed himself. And he was telling everybody that, look, I was a simple person like anybody else. I have changed, so can you. But most other people have taken it, as he wrote in the book, that Gandhi was a mediocre person, so how did he change? He was not a mediocre person, and let me give you a few examples. Certainly, later on in his book, he also wrote that when he was in junior high, he was first in class on different subjects. He won awards and prizes. So if he was a mediocre, how could he be on top of the class in many different subjects? Let me give you a few examples. Right from early childhood, he was very honest and very truthful. while he was in 6th grade, there was a English class, and a school inspector came, and the job was that teacher gave them 6 words, and they were supposed to write it down, and it was a spelling check. At that time, the plan of British government was that the education is basically to produce Indians into clerks. They should not understand what they're doing. They just learn what it is so that they can produce clerks out of them. The rich people, the children of princes with education were supposed to become high government officers. Mediocres, average people will learn and become secretaries and clerks. And the remaining will be called coolies. No education, they just do the physical work. So their education is basically to keep you at a lower level. So you just remember spellings and memorize tables and things like this. But here, inspector comes and he writes down 6 words on the blackboard, and everybody's supposed to kind of write the spellings. Now, Gandhi did not know the spellings of a word called cattle, Kettle. And his teacher was trying to tell him, copy from the boy next to you. And he was not copying. He said, I don't want to copy. And teacher was getting upset with him. He even poked him on the back, copy from the next boy. And Gandhi didn't. So in the end, everybody had 6 correct out of 6 because everybody copied. Gandhi had only 5 correct out of 6. And when inspector left, teacher was very angry with him that I kept telling you, why didn't you copy? And Gandhi said, copying is cheating. You are my teacher. Why are you asking me to cheat? It's at a very kind of abstract level, understanding that he would not cheat, he would not copy. He was very honest to begin with. There's another example. He once stole, and which child doesn't steal while you're growing up? But after he stole, he felt very guilty. He couldn't sleep. He stole a small amount of money from his brother or one of his friends. He felt so guilty that he decided to make a confession to his father. Now, his father was very strict, very authoritarian, and children could not go in front of him for anything. You couldn't even breathe in front of him. But he decided to make a confession to his father, but he could not go and talk to him. So he wrote it down. He wrote the confession and said that it's my fault, I made a mistake, and I should be given severest punishment for it. And I promise I will never do it again. He wrote that and went to his father, who was sick at that time, lying in bed. He gave him the letter. Father read the letter. He closed his eyes, and tears kind of rolled on father's cheeks. And Gandhi stood there, looking at his father. He was expecting punishment. In return, father closed his eyes and had tears in his eyes. So both wept. And Gandhi wrote in his book that this was a kind of tremendous lesson for me in ahimsa. He wrote, those tears of love cleansed my heart and washed away my sin. This was an object lesson in ahimsa. It was pure love of my father for me. Only he who has experienced such love can know what it is. When such ahimsa becomes all-embracing, it transforms everything it touches. There is no limit to its powers. So even at that time, he understood the meaning of love and ahimsa at that young age. Also, another thing, and I'm reading it from his autobiography, that he had learned to return good for evil. If somebody hurts you, don't hurt him back. Don't retaliate. Try to understand the person and try to help that person so that he can understand that evil is not good, and by you helping him, he will have a better understanding into his own nature so that he can also change. And he used this poem as a prayer for himself, which is, for a bowl of water give a godly mien. For a kindly greeting bow thou down with zeal. For a simple penny pay thou back with gold. If thy life be rescued, life do not withhold. Thus the words and actions of the wise regard. Every little service tenfold they reward. But the truly noble know all men as one, and return with gladness good for evil done. So right from early childhood, he was learning and practicing ahimsa in many ways. And whenever he made a mistake, he learned from it. And that's what he called My Experiments with Truth. That's the title of his book, that he learned as he went along. He was a great researcher. He took detailed notes. He has a great power of introspection, and which we all need if we want to transform ourselves. If we cannot critically analyze our own actions, cannot look at ourselves and see what good or bad we are doing, and what effect it is having on ourselves, on our family, on our friends, on our country, then we can't really transform ourselves. So self-introspection is very important, and I think that was in abundance in Mahatma Gandhi. Now, another situation came in South Africa when he was invited or hired by a person by the name of Dada Abdullah, who had a big business in South Africa, in Natal. And there were business problems, and Gandhi went over there, and as he learned that the matter was not simple, he thought it was going to be a simple case, but it was very complicated because nobody kept any accounts in a proper way, and most of the transactions were not done properly in a legal way, and he had to sort out all those things. And this was a case between the family itself. Dada Abdullah and one of his cousins were fighting with each other, and everybody's ego was very strong, and they were challenging each other. I will see you in the court, I'm going to run you down to earth, I'm going to make you bankrupt, and all those things. So after Gandhi understood the case, he realized that all the facts were in favor of his own client. But he realized also that going to court would mean many months of fighting in court. It may take a year, and the only people who would benefit from it are the lawyers. I mean, that's familiar. And every day that case dragged on, it kind of split the family further apart, that he was sure that at the end of the case, both families will be ready to shoot at each other or kill each other. So he didn't want that to happen. So he tried to convince Dada Abdullah to make a compromise and settle out of court, do an arbitration. But that was not the difficult part. The difficult part was to convince Dada Abdullah that he should not seek his opposite to become bankrupt. Make sure that the other party also gets some benefit out of this arbitration. So you both should be happy. You get what you want, and he gets what he wants. Not that you succeed and the other person becomes bankrupt. Most of the time, that's the situation when you fight. You want to put the other person all the way to the earth. So he did convince him. And at the end, both parties were very happy with each other. And Gandhi absolutely, of course, was ecstatic. And he wrote in his book, very interesting lesson he learned. I learned a lesson in true practice of law. I had learned to find out the better side of human nature and to enter men's hearts. I realized that the true function of a lawyer was to unite parties riven asunder. I wish all the lawyers would do that, help us solve our problems peacefully instead of keeping us apart as long as they can so that everybody can make more money out of it. So Gandhi had found actually a secret of success for himself. For all the failures in his practice of law that he had in Bombay and before that, he now found a secret that he can help people solve their problems peacefully. And his reputation spread very widely, very quickly, and not only Indians living in South Africa, but Europeans also started to come to him for arbitration. They knew that he's a trusting person, he's very honest, and whatever he tells us to do is probably right. So with that success came a lot of money, and he was earning almost close to $1 million a year at that time. So that really brought him the European lifestyle that he was seeking, or at least his brother was telling him to go for that kind of lifestyle. But he couldn't settle down in that lifestyle for a very long time because he was destined to do something different. Another incident happened, and that is, of course, very remarkable because everybody refers to that incident. Dada Abdullah had bought him a first-class train ticket to go from Natal to Transvaal, and the train goes through a kind of a hilly station which had very high altitude called Maritzburg. When Gandhi boarded the train, he was the only person in that compartment. He settled down, and in the evening, train reaches Maritzburg. Another European comes to that cabin, and he sees an Indian sitting there, and he says, "How can you travel in first class? You're not allowed to." And Gandhi said, "I have a ticket." He said, "No, you cannot have a ticket." He said, "Look, I have this first class ticket, and I can show it to you." So European said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm a lawyer, and I have been allowed practice in this country by Supreme Court of South Africa. And not only that, I am also a lawyer in England. I can practice law in England, in South Africa, and in India." So that European says, "There are no colored lawyers in South Africa." And Gandhi's argument was, "Look, I'm a lawyer, I'm colored, so at least there's one colored lawyer in this country." That infuriated that man, and he said, "I'm going to call station master and a policeman and throw you out." Gandhi said, "That's up to you, but I'm not leaving this place because legally I should travel in this train in first class because I have a ticket." So they brought the station master, and policeman came. They told him, "Go to third class." Indians were supposed to travel in third class. And Gandhi refused. So they literally picked him up and threw him out the train, and also threw out his baggage and his big coat. What happened? The big coat, nobody knows. Probably policeman took it, or they hid it from him. He only had his briefcase with his legal papers. He went to the waiting room, and they turned the light off. So he sat there in darkness. It was a hill station. It was very cold, and he was shivering, and he did not have an overcoat. And he was obviously very angry and infuriated. The fact is, he was not angry at the situation as most of us would understand, because he was not angry for being treated the way he was treated. He was angry at the cancer of humanity, that how can one race inflict pain to another race just because it's of different color. He could not understand that. That's what he was trying to understand all night, that how can one race derive pleasure by inflicting injury onto another person. And his first, obviously, by the morning came, he said, "Maybe I should go back to India. This is not a place for me." But then he thought, "No, that will be cowardice. How can I do that? I have to fight this injustice." And Gandhi had fought injustice all his life, and here was an opportunity for him. Very next day, he started writing letters to all the newspapers in South Africa, all the newspapers in England, to all the ministers in South Africa and England, all over. Not many people paid attention, some people paid attention, but that really brought a strong drive out of him to start working at this injustice. At the same time, he also started talking to other Indians living in South Africa. At that time, he had insulated himself to that particular case and living with people who were very rich and living luxuriously. But once an Indian came to him with bleeding from his head and said that his employer had hit him, he went to his house and met the family and learned more stories of those kinds of brutality, and that really moved his heart. He thought this kind of injustice should not go on. We are all men of God, and here in part of British Empire, we are all subjects of king, so we all should be treated equally. So why should king treat some people differently from others? So he started writing letters to King George, that we are all your subjects, we should be treated equally. Some of them ended up with the newspaper, then some reporters did come to meet with him. He had set up a ashram there which means a kind of community living where other people came to live with him to learn his style of living, because he was trying to develop an art of living, that you live peacefully, you should be self-sufficient, you should help everybody, and don't just live for yourself. It should be selfless service to community. While he was doing these experiments, he didn't want to be dependent on anybody, so he started to lay off his servants. The kitchen servant, the washerman, the barber, everybody was slowly laid off to free himself from all these dependencies, as he called it. In the beginning, it was to save money to serve community, serve the poor people. But later on, it basically meant to free himself from the energy that we give, that we use to control these people, and didn't want to control anybody. Here's a kind of funny and interesting story that the first time Gandhi cut his hair, it was not even. And he was in South Africa, and obviously no white barber will cut colored person's hair. So his uneven cut hair, he went to court, and obviously his hair was disheveled. Another attorney asked him, "What happened to your hair, Gandhi? Did rats get to it?" Well, they were trying to make fun of him, but Gandhi was never without a good answer. He said, "No, the white barber would not condescend to touch my black hair, so I prefer to cut it myself, no matter how badly." So there he started to learn the concept of selfless service. He was serving the community. He tried to identify all the poor people there with their sufferings and try to help them. Even though he was fighting South African government, he never said anything hateful or bad about the government all the way through. He was trying to encourage them to do the right thing. Even so, when Boer War broke out, when the South African government was trying to kill that rebellion, he had hired an ambulance, Indian ambulance, to help the sick people, the hurt people in the army, the South African soldiers, because he was basically trying to help everybody. Once plague broke out in South Africa, and nobody, as you know, wants to touch those patients. But Gandhi was the first person to reach there. And there was a nurse who told him to get away, saying that this is plague, you're going to die. He said, "No, these are my brothers. They die, I die with them. I have to save them. It's my job, it's my responsibility." And he straight went to the first person who was vomiting, full of vomiters all over his body, and he picked that person, cleaned him, and put him on bed, then went to the next person, one by one. He also started Natal Indian Congress to unify everybody, to communicate with them. He started a newspaper, weekly newspaper, so that he could write articles to tell people what is nonviolence, what is love, how should we live together. And all these things were read by many people, so a lot of people started coming to him. But something interesting happened around that time, and now this was more like a gold test for him. He had to pass through this example of renunciation. He was doing everything for the community as a selfless service. So at one point, Indian community there decided to give him an honor and give him expensive presents of gold, silver, and a diamond necklace for his wife as a recognition. We all do that, don't we? And when Indians give gifts, they always give gifts of gold and diamonds and jewelry. He was very upset. He could not sleep that night when he heard that. When he told his wife, Kasturbai, she wanted the gifts. She said, "We have given service to community, so why should I give up my necklace that they're going to give to me?" But Gandhi's idea was that all this time I have preached selfless service. So how can I take something back from the community that I have served for selfless service? From tomorrow on, I'll be working with a view, when will they give me a bigger gift next time? So it will not be selfless service from this point on, so I cannot take it. So he spent all night trying to argue it out, and next day morning, he wrote out a trust putting all those gifts in that trust for service of the community. So he accepted the gift, but he turned it back to the community. So that was a very good example of renunciation that he learned. And he said later on that once I took that decision, I have never resented it because it saved me from many temptations later on in my life. So Gandhi's experiments were leading him to rarely traveled kind of regions deep below the surface of level of consciousness, level of living, where the ordinary values of buying and selling, possessing, prestige and pleasure held no meaning at all. In fact, many writers before him had written thick volumes on truth and happiness, and people are still writing. But he was not interested in the abstract thoughts. He was interested in living the life of a happy person. Doesn't matter what you believe in. If you don't live that, it doesn't mean much. And his example was, his motto was, my life is my message. You look at my life, how I live. And that's the way it should be. Most of us hide ourselves in our house. We don't want our neighbors to know what we are doing. He lived openly. Anybody was welcome anytime. The visitors went from New Delhi, from British government, and he lived in front of them 24 hours a day, including eating, sleeping, taking a bath. Everything that he did was open to everybody, no hiding. Let's tell that to our President Clinton. Now, during this time when he was developing these experiments, he also started to become very religious. Naturally, these kind of thoughts will lead to religiosity. And he started to read all the sacred books from all the religions, from all the countries. And he was, of course, very much impressed by Bible and later on by Bhagavad Gita. And he settled down with Bhagavad Gita as his spiritual guide. And he often spent time meditating on the second chapter of Gita, trying to understand how do you maintain equanimity of your mind under different circumstances. When you have your brother, your foe, your boss, all the people in front of you, how can you treat them equally? Somebody has given you hurt, somebody has cheated you, somebody has punished you, somebody has given you love. How do you treat all of them the same way? And that was his kind of big subject for contemplation. But now the stage was set for the concept of satyagraha to develop. It was around 1896 when Boer War was just finished, and something new that Gandhi had learned in that Boer War, that the British soldiers were seeking out the rebellions and basically exterminating them. And he had the ambulance service to bring out the injured people and serve them. And he learned that it was not a rebellion. It was actually a way of seeking out those people and kill them. So the government had put a wrong name to the whole thing. It was not a rebellion, in fact, and it really hurt him very much. But he still did not withdraw his ambulance service. Then around the same time, Natal government had decided to pass a new law, which was called a black law, that no Indian could have a possession in South Africa. You cannot own land or a house. And also, you cannot leave home after 9 p.m. You need a passport or a letter from the authorities, and if you're found outside with that letter, you could be imprisoned. And any Indian could be imprisoned without any explanation for any length of time. So they call it a black law, which the whole community, when they found out, they resented it and they were ready to fight. There was a lot of violence ready to erupt. When Gandhi arrived, he talked to the group and people were shouting, we are ready to die for it. We want eye for an eye. And Gandhi said, if you want eye for an eye, all we will get is a blind nation. He said, you want to fight, I want to fight. We are all soldiers here. You want to die, I want to die too. But not with violence. We will meet violence with civil disobedience. We will just not obey them and let them do what they want to do. They can beat my body, they can kill me, but then they will have my dead body. But my spirit will be free. And if we are ready to die, then let's die in such a way that we can win at the end. Because either they will have to change the law, or we will all die. And if you're ready to die, so be it. Because if this law passes, we are dead anyway. So everybody agreed with him, and they all decided not to go to work. And obviously the government challenged, and they were put in jail. None of these people retaliated. They very quietly went to jail. They did not say any strong, bad word to those police officers. And they were very nice to them. Now, those soldiers had never seen these kinds of people who will not fight back, will not say anything bad. In the jail, they were all organized. They will cook their own food. And government couldn't understand what to do. The general who was head of the government was General Smuts. He was a hero of the Boer War. He decided to have a meeting with Mahatma Gandhi. So he called him. And Gandhi went over there with great confidence, sat in front of him and said to him, General Smuts, I have come here to tell you that we are going to fight you. And General Smuts thought, he was a soldier, that he must be hearing things. So he said, you mean you have come to tell me that you're going to fight me? Then he said mockingly, is there anything else that you want to say? So Gandhi said, yes, I'm going to win. So Smuts was astonished, and he said, well, tell me, how are you going to do that? How are you going to win? And Gandhi said, of course, with your help. And years later, Smuts wrote, he said that exactly this is what Gandhi did. By his courage, by his determination, by his refusal to take unfair advantage, by his endless capacity to stick it out, without yielding and without retaliation, Gandhi managed to get generals' respect and friendship. And one by one, the laws most offensive to Indians were repealed. Not only that, years later when General Smuts retired from his service in South Africa and went back to England, he started to plead cause for India's independence. So Gandhi had changed him so much. That is satyagraha, that you convert your enemy to make him understand love and peace. As Gandhi wrote, that satyagraha is to win over the opposition, to transform the opponent, drawing him as a participant and beneficiary in the solution, and create a win-win situation for both sides. Because in that struggle, both sides came out happy. South African government got its people back to go back and work in mines, and those people got their rights back, so nobody was hurt in the end, everybody was happy. The same thing for India's independence. British government could not rule the country. It was too big for them, and there was too much of ready violence to send them back to England. But with peaceful solution, both countries have remained friends for the last 50 years, and they both have benefited economically from each other. So these are win-win situations that satyagraha creates. When Gandhi finally returned to India in 1914, he was a seasoned veteran of nonviolence, of course, and he suggested to Indian Congress to use the same methods for India's independence, and he met a resistance. One of the persons who first came to him, challenged him, was Mr. J.B. Kripalani, a big historian. And he said to Gandhi point blank, Gandhi, you may know about Bible or Gita, but you know nothing about history. Never has a nation been able to free itself without violence or armed struggle. And that probably is true. That's the way we have seen. If you look at the history, nobody has been able to free itself, at least before India's independence. But Gandhi smiled and said, Mr. Kriplani, you know nothing about history. The first thing you have to learn from history is that because something has not taken place in the past, that does not mean it cannot take place in the future. That's a very bright answer. Nobody would have thought of that. And that can only come from a person who has been truthful in his life, has confidence, and has been meditating and loves everybody. I'm getting close to my time, so I want to condense a little bit. Obviously, as I said, Gandhi's love was very infectious, and anybody who came close to him was really impressed and joined him in his style of living. And one of the most well-known examples is Jawaharlal Nehru, who was Prime Minister of India. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru was educated in England. He was son of a very wealthy, very well-known lawyer, Motilal Nehru, who was honored by Britishers as Sir Motilal Nehru. He was knighted. But when he met Gandhi, he took off all his Western clothes, put on the homespun khadi, and followed him. And Motilal was very upset. He didn't want to lose his son. He wanted him to practice law and become a very successful lawyer. So Motilal came to Mahatma Gandhi and pleaded to him to give him back his only son. But Mahatma Gandhi replied, he listened to him, and he said, not only do I want your son, then he kind of smiled at him and said, I want you, I want your wife, I want your daughters, and rest of your family. Motilal couldn't believe, but that's exactly what happened. Sir Motilal Nehru gave up his knighthood. His two daughters joined Gandhi, and his house, a big house, a mansion called Anand Bhavan, was also given over to Gandhi to conduct the Indian Congress activities. Even Britishers, like Viceroy and other authorities, when they were assigned to go to India, they were instructed, don't go near Gandhi. They used to, he will get you. So such is the power of ahimsa and satyagraha. But what do we learn from it in today's world? I think we can use it in our daily lives on a smaller scale and on a wider scale in the whole world. Look at what's happening, the violence in the world. We know the Cold War is over, and we give credit to President Reagan. But honestly speaking, is it over? It only, the attention has shifted from there to many other places. Since then, war has erupted in Iraq, South Korea, North Korea, and then in the North Africa, and many other places. It just keeps shifting. But if you use satyagraha, you can really find a peaceful solution so that people can live peacefully for many years. So we still need satyagraha, even though it is very difficult, and we have no Gandhi amongst us to do that. But if most of us can learn this, and we can use it daily in our local, at our local level, at a small level, at a home level, at least we can uplift ourselves, improve our life, and be able to live peacefully. I do want to say one thing, that we have a Gandhi Center in St. Louis. And there's a lot of problem going on over there. And it's unfortunate that in the name of Gandhi, the board of directors there have been fighting something that Mahatma Gandhi would not have even tolerated. So we need to start at home. Gandhi said, Satyagraha starts with the individual, starts at home. We are in St. Louis. Let's learn from this, see if we can solve our problems both at home, in our office, in our community. Thank you. Om Sarvesham Swastirbhavatu Sarvesham Shantirbhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May good befall all. May there be peace for all. May all be fit for perfection. May all experience that is auspicious. Om, peace, peace be unto all.